We lowered the drug prices for the MDR-TB. We lowered the price of the drugs by 90%. We started, and we treated 50 cases in one town of 100,000 people. That ended up changing the world.
We have a clip to play for you.
Fue una lucha en la que fue bien dura. Que
That's milky
tanto de personas que realmente estuvieron ahí.
This is what a transformation, my God. To think we almost let him die.
That was so interesting. We thought, oh my God, this tiny group of people in this tiny organization, we can change the world. So I never stopped doing that. All the other titles were temporary, but that has stayed with me until today. And so just like MDR-TB, there was an issue that was boiling over, and that was treating HIV in developing countries. So this is Joseph Jun. He was about his mid-20s at the time, from an extremely poor part of Haiti. He came to the clinic suffering from both tuberculosis and HIV. But we had gotten donations of antiretroviral drugs, of anti-HIV drugs. And so we started treating him. In a period of about 3 months, this is what he looked like.
와, 헬시해졌어. 건강해졌어.
So we call this the Lazarus effect of HIV treatment. And the people who were actually living with HIV were mostly in Africa. 25 million people living with HIV in Africa. And we almost couldn't believe it because the HIV doctors were saying exactly the same thing as the TB doctors. It's not possible, it's crazy, the drugs are too expensive, don't even think about treating HIV in developing countries. Once again, they were saying the drugs are too expensive, and at that time, the drugs cost $12,000 per person per year. But that's because they were on patent. And again, I had studied the pharmaceutical industry, so I knew that we could get them off patent, right? We could, and so the argument I made was, so the pharmaceutical industry only makes 1% of its profit in Africa, right? So why are you stopping us from making generic versions of these drugs? Why are you stopping us from doing that? And so they literally wanted to get me fired because I was trying to break patents. And I said, no, I'm not trying to break patents. I just want to figure out a way that we can get the same drugs in generic version to Africa because 25 million people are dying. So Paul Farmer, who I told you about, took those before and after pictures to the White House. Took them to the White House, showed them to George W. Bush's top aides, and that evening, January 28, 2003, George Bush announced, partly based on seeing Joseph Jun's pictures, that he was going to treat HIV.
I asked the Congress to commit $15 billion over the next 5 years, including nearly $10 billion in new money, to turn the tide against AIDS in the most afflicted nations of Africa and the Caribbean.
Now, so interesting, I became head of the HIV department and I set a goal. When we started at WHO in July of 2003, there were about 100,000 people in the world in developing countries getting care. So I said, let's just change the game. Let's treat 3 million people by 2005. So 2.5 years, 3 million people, that's almost impossible because we had to bring the drug prices down. And guess what? We brought the prices from $12,000 per person per year to $70 per person per year. So that eventually the US, but all the other countries, bought these drugs for $70 per person per year. Today, 27 million people in Africa are on treatment. You don't know if something's going to happen. When we were running Partners in Health, we were working in Haiti and Peru and Mexico, some very poor communities. One student asked me, so I think you guys are crazy. You go into these incredibly difficult situations And you always talk about how optimistic you are, right? And it just doesn't make any sense. Because I go there and I don't feel optimistic when I see these situations of great poverty. And so at that moment, just sort of off the top of my head, if you go into these very poor situations and walk around saying, oh God, you can't do anything here, they're so, they're in such bad shape, there's nothing we can do. If that's your attitude, that's the outcome.
우울증.
So 36.8% of people in Korea are thought to be depressed. So there's been tremendous growth, as we know, but this is really disturbing. Highest expected rate of depression in the entire OECD. So what's to blame? So Jonathan Haidt says that the front-facing camera, because of social media, and high-speed internet access, if you put those together, anxiety and depression among young people goes up. So once again, Korea is the highest social media usage. And Korea at 89.3% is about 1.7 times that of other countries. So we know that the use of social media and anxiety and depression are linked, and Korea is one of the most difficult situations in the world. Right? So another thing that you ask, okay, so 36.8% of all Koreans have depression. How many of them get treated? Only 2% of Korean people get access to antidepressive therapy. So again, this shouldn't surprise us that suicide rates are high. If the highest rate of depression and lowest rate of treatment, there really is the lowest rate of treatment in OECD. Loneliness, we know that so-called 고독사, right? 고독사 is higher in Korea than anywhere else. One of my former students was the Surgeon General, the top doctor in the United States, and he said, if you answer yes on a questionnaire when they ask you, are you lonely? It shortens your life the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it has a direct effect. Anxiety and loneliness have so much to do with suffering, and it's an entirely treatable phenomenon. And the only way to fix it is for the Korean people to demand that it gets fixed. Right? In the US, you see a lot of celebrities talking about depression. You know, Dwayne Johnson said depression doesn't discriminate, it affects everybody. Lady Gaga also said that she suffered from depression her entire life, founded a nonprofit. The British actress Emma Thompson also said depression is really common, it's something that we should all think about. And I had the great good fortune of meeting the BTS guys. And I was on a panel with them at the UN, and RM gave a beautiful speech about how people should love themselves.
I have come to love myself for who I am, for who I was, and for who I hope to become. What is your name? Speak yourself. Thank you very much.
It wasn't specifically about depression, not specifically about suicide, but it was wonderful. So there's the possibility that we can talk about this more effectively. A story about a friend of mine. His name is Kevin Hines, and he's a very famous person because he's one of the few people to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, in San Francisco, one of the highest bridges. He jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he wasn't either killed or paralyzed. There are only about 3 or 4 people in history who've jumped and were not killed or paralyzed. So Kevin is still there, and he still struggles. But here's what he told me that was just so powerful. He said that before he jumped, he was walking back and forth on the bridge for 45 minutes, looking very distressed, right? And there were many people that walked by him and saw him. And he said that if one person had asked him, "How are you doing?" he wouldn't have jumped. And the other thing he says that's crazy is he says that when he jumped off the bridge, he thought he had endless problems. His problems were unsolvable. But he said the minute his hand came off the bridge, all the solutions to his problems came into his head. And he thought, what an idiot. Why did you do that? And he says many survivors of suicide say the same thing. When they actually take the action, they go, oh my God, what am I doing? When I was in my hometown, Muscatine, Iowa, one of the things that one of the mothers who lost a child told me, and told the entire audience, she said, you know, I just want you to know that my daughter did not want to die. She just wanted the pain to end, right? She said, I don't believe she wanted to die. I don't believe she wanted to leave us. I believe she wanted to make the pain end. And so this is why it's so important to train people in seeing what's going on with others. There are some things that are happening out there in the world that are very encouraging, but then there are also things about Korea. My understanding is that the percentage of the health budget that's spent on mental health in Korea is only 1.9%. And that's extremely low. It should be 5% and above. And at the same time, there are great programs. So we started called Mindful Connect or Mind SOS. And one of our colleagues, Dr. Baek Jong-ho, he started a program called, it's 보고 듣고 말하기, right? It's essentially what we call psychological first aid. So you know, it's very popular for learning CPR and learning first aid, right? And so back in the United States, I'm trying to train everybody on a college campus in psychological first aid. And what you're taught is how do you spot people who might be in trouble? So when I took my psychiatry classes and also when I was a doctor, what they would say is, if you walk into a room with someone and you feel depressed, it's likely that that person might be depressed. But the psychological first aid teaches you how to look around and ask yourself the question, hey, could these people be in trouble? And then you listen intently. And then if you think this person is at risk, here are the numbers to call. 109, right, in Korea, right? 백구, right? There are things to do that you can do. So I think it would be great if everyone in Korea was trained in psychological first aid, because the experts believe that every single suicide is preventable. There were 14,000 suicides a year in Korea. Every one of those lives we could have saved. So UK started a ministry of loneliness. And that minister's job is to find the people who are lonely, isolated, and try to put programs together. Japan also, after COVID-19, appointed a minister for loneliness and isolation.
Wow.
And you know, I was also deeply inspired by the efforts of these two countries, because I believe Korea can do it as well, right? There's no reason Korea can't do that. So I really hope that everyone here, please ask us afterwards. We can help you get access to psychological first aid training. That's the kind of literacy that Koreans need to have. You know, the great sociologist Emil Durkheim said that he wrote this book called Suicide, and he said, high suicide rate is the surest indication of a society that has lost its social integration. They've lost each other, right? I think Koreans are capable of enormous empathy. And the example I often give, right? So the other time when my World Bank staff gave me all this information on Korea was during the IMF 시대, the 금모기 운동. So I think it was a total of 3.2 million Koreans just came to the ministry, dropped their gold. And the total value was $2.3 billion US. $2.3 billion US. And my World Bank staff said it was the greatest act of human solidarity they had ever seen. So what we need empathy to grow. You know, helping each other face to face, asking your friends if they're in trouble, asking your friends if they had thought about hurting themselves, and getting trained so you know what to do, you're comfortable with asking the questions. And unfortunately, I think it's no exaggeration to say that Korea is the country right now most in need of what we might call the miracle of empathy, an outpouring of empathy that's so different from all the bullying that you hear about. So, what did they say? You can do it, right? I think Korea can do it, and it has to do it. a revolution of empathy, a revolution of care that will, Koreans are so smart, are so well trained, are so well educated that something that starts relatively small, I think can grow quickly, right? So if all of you can be part of the revolution in empathy, I think that it will be another Korean miracle.